Alright, so in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at this Draco HD FPV system made by HGLRC. Now, this isn't a brand new system. It's been around for a couple of months now, but from what I understand, when the system first came out, it wasn't working very well, and a lot of the early reviews on this system weren't very good. But HGLRC are saying that they've listened to the feedback that they've had, and they've then gone away and attempted to fix a lot of those issues. And they now think that the system works very well. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the system and finding out, does it actually work? And I think the first thing to do to start this review is to talk about what exactly it is that you get in the kit. So you're going to get two things. You're going to get a ground unit. This is a small module which is designed to be connected either to a pair of goggles or to a FPV screen via HDMI. And the cost of the ground unit is about £110 by itself. And then you're also going to get an air unit, and that's going to be a camera and a video transmitter. Now they do three different versions of the air unit. There is the A1 Lite, the A1 Pro, and then the A2 Pro. The first two there are fairly generic FPV cameras, but the A2 Pro, this is supposed to be a night vision camera, and they really make a point of highlighting this on their website, that it's supposed to be a very, very good night vision camera. And obviously, given the history of my channel, where I've reviewed a lot of night vision cameras, that is the version that I've opted for. So I've got the A2 Pro here, and this costs £126. That means that the entire kit that you see here costs around £237. Now, just to do a very quick little look at what you get. So you get two boxes, obviously one for the ground unit and one for the air unit. With the ground unit, you obviously get the ground unit module itself. You then obviously get two circularly polarized antennas, a power cable, and also a HDMI cable that's needed to connect the module to your goggles. The air unit, you then obviously get the camera and the video transmitter. You then get two circularly polarized antennas with that, a bag of screws, and then you also get the wiring harnesses that are required to connect the air unit to your flight controller. Now, just to explain, the module, it doesn't have a built-in battery, so you do need to power it with an external battery. And the voltage range for that is 8 to 30 volts, so a nice big wide voltage range. And the air unit also has the same wide voltage range of 8 to 30 volts. Now, HGLRC are claiming that this system should be good for 15 kilometers of range. And they also say that it should be able to do 1080p at 60 frames per second. So now that I've showed you what you get in the kit, let's start talking about my experience of using it. And the first thing I just want to quickly mention is that HGLRC, in addition to sending me this kit, they were actually also very nice, and they sent me one of their 5-inch freestyle quadcopters. They sent me their Mi 5 quadcopter. So for the initial testing that I did, I actually installed the air unit into that. And then the ground unit, I had that connected to a FPV screen. That's just because, unfortunately, my FPV goggles are broken and I can't afford to get a new pair. So yeah, I had the module just stuck to the back of a FPV screen, and then obviously connected it to the screen with a HDMI cable. So I'll put some footage on screen for you now so you can see how I got on with my testing. And yeah, these first couple of flights I did were with the quadcopter, were just flying around a park in the middle of the day, doing a little bit of like gentle proximity flying around trees. I haven't flown a freestyle quadcopter for probably 6 or 7 years, so I was flying this like a bit of an old lady. I wasn't doing anything fast or anything extreme. But anyway, so you can probably see straight away the same thing that I saw. This footage doesn't look like 1080p. It looks very sort of mushy. It's all a bit sort of smeared together. There aren't any sharp details in the slightest. I wouldn't want to be sort of like trying to fly sort of too close to trees, which might have ghost branches, because I don't think you'd be able to see them. The footage was certainly good enough that I was able to, confidently sort of fly the quadcopter around the park whilst going quite slow. I wouldn't want to be trying to do anything at high speed though, just because, like I said, you're not going to be able to see those fine details. I couldn't really see anything in the way of sort of significant lag, which was good. But like I said, image very, very smeary, a little bit blocky every now and again. At no point did it look like nice, crisp HD 1080p footage. Another thing I noticed as well is that at random points in the flight, the exposure just suddenly changed. And it seemed to do this completely at random. Just either the image would suddenly get a little bit darker or a little bit brighter. Also, the white balance would sometimes shift a little bit as well. It'd be a bit of a color change. So that was very random. I don't know what was causing that, but I just want to let you know everything that I saw. Now, the image quality, like I said, wasn't amazing, but one thing that I actually was quite impressed with was just the link quality. So I was, as you can see, sort of flying around a lot of trees, and a lot of this was being done whilst actually flying behind myself. But at no point in the flight did I ever see the connection break. The image never froze. It never went to a black screen or a blue screen or anything like that. I always had a solid link the entire way through the flight. And I didn't fly far in this, but I think the most I did was probably a couple of 100 meters. But, the fact that I was doing it behind myself and behind trees and stuff, I was quite impressed with the link quality. Now, I should just explain at this point that the Draco system does come with its own OSD, which is independent to the OSD that you set up for the aircraft. Just on the bottom of the screen, you get various little bits of information that show up talking about the voltage of the air unit, voltage of the ground station, and some other stuff, including the bit rate. Now, you can change the bit rate by going into the menu system. I think by default it was set to 8 megabits per second, and I think I was able to jack it up to 24 megabits per second. I did, during my testing, try changing the bit rate to see whether it made any noticeable difference. But to be honest, I never noticed it did. I found actually, when I was sort of like testing the system, the bit rate almost always seemed to be either 3 or 5 megabits per second. And that didn't seem to matter whether the aircraft was in flight or whether it was right beside the ground station. So I'm not really sure whether the bit rate just isn't very good, or maybe just it doesn't report it to the OSD very well. I'm not really sure. Certainly as I was flying around, sometimes if the signal sort of got a little bit sort of degraded and the image got a bit more pixelated, I never saw that reflected in the bit rate. Sometimes I'd have a very, very good signal and the bit rate would be 3 megabits per second apparently. Other times it would be the other way around, and it just didn't really seem to make much sense. So yeah, not really sure what's going on with the bit rate there, but I thought it was important to just mention that to you. Now, I did do a couple of flights whilst I was in the park that day, and the first one was, absolutely fine. Like I said, the image quality was a bit mushy, but, the link quality was good. But when I did the second flight, something very strange happened. About halfway through the flight, I can't remember exactly what triggered it, but suddenly it's almost like the frame rate just massively dropped. As I said a minute ago, this is supposed to be a 60 frames per second FPV system, but at this random point, it was almost like the frame rate dropped to like 2 or 3 frames per second. Like it just really dropped, and the footage became very, very jittery. Now, this happened whilst the quadcopter is a little bit of a distance away from myself, so I thought maybe if I fly back towards myself, maybe things would get better. But even as the quadcopter passed in front of me, just like 2 or 3 meters away, things didn't improve. The footage continued to stay very, very jittery, like there was a very, very low frame rate. And that persisted for the rest of the flight. So I'm not really sure what that was all about. Like I said, my first thought was, maybe just like the link quality kind of sort of got a little bit interrupted or something. But I said the quadcopter flies right in front of me. You really would expect that to, pick back up again and work better. So I'm not really sure what that's an indication of, but maybe the system isn't very good at recovering, when it loses its signal. So yeah, the conclusion of me doing the first couple of flights there was that basically image quality, not great, link quality, pretty good, camera exposure stuff, a little bit strange, and then, yeah, a weird issue with sort of the frame rate suddenly dropping and then not recovering. Now, the following day, I went out and I did some more testing, but this time I removed the air unit from the Mi-5 quadcopter and I instead put it in my Hewing T2. Now, the reason for doing that is, one, because I am mostly a fixed-wing pilot, not a quadcopter pilot. But two, by putting it in the Hewing T2, that allowed me to then test the system over a much bigger distance, actually test the range a little bit. Obviously, when you're flying a small quadcopter, you can't sort of fly it very far without losing line of sight. Whereas with the T2, because this is a very, very big aircraft, I could fly that to a much, much further distance and maintain line of sight, which means I could test the range while still staying legal. So yeah, I'll put the footage of that on screen for you now. And superficially, the footage probably looks quite similar. It doesn't look like 1080p. It still looks a little bit mushy. But I did find that it didn't look as bad as it did the day before. And I think the reason for that is because the most of this flight, I was actually flying up higher, which meant that I wasn't close to the ground. I wasn't close to trees. So I wasn't close to anything that you'd need to see in sort of great detail. When you're flying higher, things look a little bit less detailed anyway. So it's a little bit more forgiving. Now, during this flight, I was able to, do a little bit of range. I flew out to 1 kilometer a couple of times. That's kind of the limit of what I could do whilst maintaining line of sight. But every single time I was able to fly out to 1 kilometer and I had absolutely no issues whatsoever. I didn't see any pixelation. I didn't see any drop in frame rate. I didn't see sort of the image degrade in any way whatsoever. The link actually seemed very, very good and very solid and very reliable. So I was actually very impressed with that. I did still see the camera do a couple of weird things throughout the flight. The exposure suddenly changed randomly a couple of times and the white balance also changed a couple of times as well. But in general, yeah, I found the system worked way better on a fixed wing. Like I said, could be just because, you're flying a little bit higher, you're not close to the ground, so you don't see the smearing so much. And obviously also when you're flying higher, there aren't any obstacles in the way to kind of mess up the signal. Now, obviously, both the flights I just showed you were done in the middle of the day on very, very bright sunny days. But part of the kit that I've got here is that A2 Pro camera, which is supposed to be a very good night vision camera. So obviously that was the thing that I was next interested in testing. Now to do this, I put the air unit back in the Mi-5 quadcopter, just because this allowed me to then test it in a local park rather than having to be stood in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. And I did the flight probably about half hour, 45 minutes after sunset. Now it is summer here, peak summer, which means that even sort of 45 minutes after sunset, it's not fully dark, but it was certainly sort of dark enough that, it should have been a good time to test the camera. And yeah, as you can see from the footage here, I sort of took off and I sort of flew down this field and sort of back up the field. And I wasn't blown away by the footage. I could see where I was going sort of reasonably well. And I think, if there was like maybe some goalposts in the field, I would have been able to easily see them and sort of fly through them. But I certainly wouldn't say that this was like any kind of like amazing night vision camera. Certainly not compared to some of the ones I reviewed in the past, such as like the Walksnail Avatar Pro or the Caddx Infra camera. That's a very, very good night vision camera. This camera, the A2 Pro, it just seemed kind of sort of okay. It wasn't amazing by any means. And one thing I certainly noticed as well is that in the lower light there, I was getting a lot of motion blur. You could tell that the frame rate had dropped a lot to compensate for the lower light, which meant that things, got very, very smeary as I was flying around. And I certainly wouldn't want to be trying to do any fast sort of proximity whilst flying with it. Now, one thing that I should mention is that if you go into the menu system on the Draco ground unit, you can then access a whole load of settings. And some of those settings are for the camera. And specifically, you can change the scene mode. Now, by default, the camera is set to day mode. But obviously, I was interested to see what happened if I set the camera to night mode. But what I found was that it seemed to make absolutely no difference. And I tested this during the day and during the night. Changing the scene mode doesn't seem to change anything at all. Doesn't seem to change any of the colors or the sensitivity or anything like that. So I'm not sure if that's just something that's not working yet. Maybe it's a bug in the firmware, I don't know. But certainly changing it to night mode didn't make it work any better when flying in the dark than when it was in day mode. Now, after doing that flight, I was still keen to play around with the A2 camera a little bit more, just to see sort of what it's like in even darker conditions. But that's when I discovered that the camera has got quite possibly the most ridiculous flaw that I've ever seen. Basically, what I discovered is that if you try using the camera in an environment which is completely black, the camera ends up turning itself off. I was able to demonstrate this even on the bench in the middle of the daytime, actually. I found that if I just had the camera running, so you can see the image absolutely fine. If I then just completely cover the camera lens with my hand for a moment, when I take my hand away, the image is completely gone. It's gone to black and it stays black and it doesn't come back. The only way to get the image to come back is to actually physically disconnect the power from the camera and then reconnect it to cause the camera to reboot. This is the most bizarre kind of fault I've ever seen on a camera, especially one which is advertised as being a night vision camera. If you put the camera in the dark, the camera turns off. How is that a night vision camera at all? I find it baffling that HGLRC are able to advertise this as being a night vision camera when it doesn't work in the actual dark. All I can guess is that at some point, during testing, they never actually tested it in the dark. But that doesn't really bode very well, does it? They shouldn't be advertising this as being a night vision camera when it's got a fault as glaringly obvious and ridiculous as that. So yeah, my conclusion of the A2 Pro camera is it absolutely is not a night vision FPV camera in the slightest. I mean, in the low light, it kind of worked okay, but it certainly doesn't work anywhere near as well as some of the other night vision FPV cameras out there. And as you saw, obviously, if you try using a completely pitch black room, it just doesn't work at all. The camera just turns off. So yeah, it's absolutely not a night vision camera. Now, my sort of conclusion after looking at the Draco system on the whole, actually, I think it's actually got some promise to it. It's not quite there yet, but then when Walksnail first came out a couple of years ago, that system also didn't work very well at the very beginning. It was very buggy. But over time, you know, Walksnail, they continued to listen to feedback and tweak the firmware and stuff. And they eventually got to the point where it's at today, where it works very, very well. And I think HGLRC are probably on the same path. As I said at the beginning of the video, when the Draco system first came out, apparently it hardly worked at all. It was very, very buggy. With this new firmware update, it certainly seems to be better, but there are still obviously a lot of issues. But I reckon if they keep on sort of working at it, I think there's a good chance they could actually get this system up and running very well, and then it could actually be a viable alternative to the likes of Walksnail. So do I think you should buy this kit today? Probably not. However, I do think you should keep an eye on it, because I do genuinely think they're not far off of actually having this work quite well. I think that probably most of the problems that this system are having are probably firmware related. So if they can just kind of refine that software a little bit, I reckon this could end up actually working very well. And then at that point, actually be a viable sort of product. So yeah, that is kind of my conclusion. Now, keep an eye on this. I do think it's got a lot of promise. I think it's almost there. It's just not quite. Anyway, I basically run out of things to say now. But as always, if you enjoyed watching this video, please do give it a like down below, because it does generally really help keep the algorithm happy. And yeah, I guess I will catch you in the next one. Cheers, guys. Bye.